What's up? I'm the Drink Pro. We're doing a side-by-side of light whiskey from Cat's Eye Distillery. What's up, everybody? I'm the Drink Pro. Thanks so much for joining me. Thanks for subscribing, liking, sharing this video, getting on the Patreon, everything that you do to support the show. I'm really excited today, guys, because we're trying two different whiskeys from the Obtainium Light Whiskey lineup. Now, this lineup is from the Cat's Eye Distillery, and this is in Iowa. Shout out the Special Projects team. Shout out Charles Abraham. I've got a couple of supporters out there in Iowa, and I'm happy to try something that's local for you all. Cat's Eye Distillery has its name actually from a nebula, the Cat's Eye Nebula. John Baker, who created Cat's Eye Distillery, picked this up as sort of a passion project. He was told by his wife Linda to follow his passion, and I think from that he took that he should mix together things he really enjoys. He also really enjoys astrophotography, and the Cat's Eye Nebula is always something that's interested him. Now, there's not a lot of micro distilleries in Iowa, but it's a growing market. It's growing very rapidly, and this Obtainium series of light whiskey is a really good way to put the Cat's Eye Distillery on the map. It's older, it's higher proof, it's something they're not going to be able to produce at that distillery up until this point. Cat's Eye Distillery is actually probably sourcing this whiskey. Let me confirm that. Yeah, it says it's distilled in Indiana, so this is very likely an MGP distillate. And light whiskey, as I've talked about a little in the past, is usually a very, very high proof whiskey because of the nature of the product. Regular whiskey can only be distilled up to a certain proof, and if you go beyond that proof, it becomes light whiskey. And part of that's because so many flavors are lost as you distill at a higher and higher proof, that incredibly high proof whiskeys, they'll become interesting, but they won't get as much depth and breadth as a whiskey that's distilled at a lower percentage before it's put into a barrel. So this is kind of a fun one because these are two different light whiskeys. They're both being made by MGP and sourced by Cat's Eye, and they're also different ages. The bottle that I have here, it was distilled in 2005 and bottled in 2019. So this is a 13 year and 10 month, actually, to be specific, whiskey. Whereas this other one I've got here is 11 years and 7 months, and it's sitting at a slightly lower proof, I believe. The proof on the bottle I've got is 138.9, and the proof on the sample is 137.2. So this is a great situation where we can try two different light whiskeys and kind of highlight the interesting nuances of light whiskey as compared to regular whiskey, but also as compared to each other to see how light whiskey that's made by the same people in the same process, but just slightly different age, can end up being very different pours. Let's go ahead and pour these out. Oh, that's a quiet one. Ooh. Yeah. Now, what's really interesting on the nose here, guys, is the bottle of light whiskey here, the older one and the higher proof one, is way dustier. Dusty corn is a real common note in high-proof younger whiskeys. These are not younger, but they're so high-proof that they can tend to behave a bit younger. It almost smells like sawdust. It's almost a fragrant perfume. This very light, floral, sawdust quality, dusty corn. It really does smell like a perfume. It's actually kind of amazing. This smells like something I've smelled people wearing around the streets. Now, this one is the sample I have. But I'm getting a similar perfumey note as well on this. I'm getting a floral note very prominently. I'm getting a slight tropical fruit note. I may even call that a coconut quality. But they're both very aromatic. They're very floral. They're very perfume forward. There's subtle differences. I think there's actually more coming out in the lower proof younger one. The subtle woody note on the older one makes it even more smell like a cologne or a perfume, whereas the younger one has the more citrus, and the sweeter notes start to show up. The honey's more prominent, the citrus is more prominent. And so that dusty corn quality and that woody quality don't read as perfume as much. There's certainly still a strong floral note, but it's not overbearing. I think this older one, this higher proof one, it really just screams this is supposed to be worn and not drank. As I let this sit in the glass, that sort of soft, sawdust, musty note is sort of dissipating, and we're getting a little bit more of the sweet corn is showing up. I'm also getting a really soft banana quality to this particular whiskey, which is not something I'm getting at all from the younger, lower proof whiskey. The sample is not getting me there at all. There might be a slight butterscotch note on this older one. That isn't showing up at all in the younger one. Yeah, the younger one I'm getting more sweeter, like honey and sweet fruits. Almost an apple note, but this older one, it's more musty, it's more refined, but in a way that might not be my favorite. I typically prefer those sweet fruit notes in whiskey. I might not actually like the older one as much. Let's give them a taste. I'm going to start with the younger one. Now that young whiskey almost tastes like a rye. It's got all those sharp spices you expect from a rye. It's lightly sweet. It's very gentle though. There's almost no finish. I get a tip of my tongue dancing pepper on the finish. That's the only way I know it has a finish at all. Very gentle pour, which is kind of expected from light whiskey. It's not gonna blow you out of the water. Wow, the older one is much sweeter. It's almost like straight honey and sweet malted grain, and there's a lot more of a finish. The mid palate has this sort of like a slight barrel flavor, but it's also a little bit nutty, and the finish gives you the pepper dance on the tongue, but it also has this sweetness come back. The honey reappears from the beginning of the pour. Let's go to the younger one again. I'm starting to get a little bit of a minty quality, but it's much more gentle than you would get from, say, the Thomas H. Handy, where I had an incredibly high mint quality. This is much more subtle mint. It's mostly the sweet, soft grain. It's very classic, high-proof, light whiskey profile. It's gentle, slightly sweet, slightly grain, hints of pepper on the back end to remind you of something else. I'm almost starting to get a cherry note, which is a very classic bourbon note off the nose of this. But the more I keep drinking it, the more that seemingly rye spice dissipates. I think that was sort of the high proof deceiving me a little bit. Once I get used to this higher proof and that spice dissipates, it really does just present like a very classic light whiskey. It's very good. I really like it, but it's not particularly complex or interesting. Now let's go to the Papa Bear here. I'm getting like a rose petal on the nose of this of the older one here. They both have some slight floral qualities, but the sour tinge reminds me more of a rose. Whew, whiskey isn't supposed to go up the nose like that. There might be a subtle eucalyptus in this. I mentioned that there was some sort of subtle mint in the younger one. The older one is much more refined, and that eucalyptus shows up. And it's interesting because it's not that much more time in a barrel. I think it's 2 more years, but that 2 years makes a difference, and it really brings out some more softness and layering to the flavors. So the mint is not as sharp and single-noted, where it's a spearmint, and it becomes something more like a eucalyptus or maybe even a menthol. If there was a tobacco note on this, it would definitely be like a menthol cigarette. Definitely more honeyed. The old one is definitely more honeyed than the younger. The younger one, I'm getting a slight fruit note still on the nose. That just doesn't show up in this older one. It's hard to stop drinking these. I like them both so much. They both are very similar. There's very subtle differences between the two. I actually think I probably prefer the younger one only because I prefer having more of those fruit notes over the wood notes. If I could have them both, I would love to have them both, but in this case, I sort of have to pick one or the other. The young fruit note, it's less sweet, it's more fruity. The floral note is a little sharper and narrower, as is the mint note. You get spearmint and maybe just a general floral note, whereas on the older one, the mint mellows out, becomes more of a eucalyptus, and the floral note becomes more prominent and specific. It's much more rose-centric. The sweetness is definitely there, very prominent sweetness. There's also a hint of wood that isn't showing up in the younger one, probably because it hasn't had enough time and it's so high proof. The wood hasn't been able to really penetrate into the flavor profile. So both of these are excellent pours. If I have to pick one, unfortunately I have to go with the one that is not my bottle, but they're both very good. It's a very small preference, so I will be more than happy to keep enjoying my Obtainium Light Whiskey here. I believe this was a $70 bottle, and I really, really think it's worth that, guys. You know, it's hard to justify sometimes, especially on a light whiskey, where I've kind of expressed it's not going to be as rich and nuanced, there's going to be less flavors, but I think it's a really good profile. The flavors that are there are very good. It's also very high proof, so this will last you a while. And I think it's a really good bottle. Thanks so much, David Speaks, for providing the sample. Really wonderful. Glad we were able to do this side by side. And And shout out, he also provided the Willet sample, which I did a little while ago, so that was good on him. Thanks so much for joining me, guys. I hope you'll consider joining the Patreon, becoming a supporting member of the Society of Drinking Professionals. We can keep doing drinks like this. There's a lot more content out there that's available that I'm happy to keep making and providing. I want to know more about your opinions, so reach out to me any way you can. Like, subscribe, share, click the notification bell. Thanks so much for your support. I love having all these people trying to help me make the show, and anything you can do to help as well is so appreciated. Thanks, everybody, and keep drinking like professionals. Cheers.